Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Govan, CEO and Wallis Annenberg, Director of LACMA, and I'm very pleased to have you all here tonight with us and to have with us Vera Lutter, who is an incredible artist. I spoke with a few of you as we were walking to the theater. I know many of you know her work, some for a long time, but she is in the middle of a residency here at LACMA, and with generous support from Sotheby's that started this project. Her work here began in February of 2017. And it's a multi-part project. Part of it has been to document the campus that we have and also the permanent collection. We're going to talk about that. But I think most of you, or some of you, may know that she has a very distinctive technique that utilizes photography. But this new body of work, I think, is something she has thought about a long time and is now in the middle of, and so we thought it would be a great time to talk about it. There will be an exhibition in the future. Vera has worked all over the world. You may have seen pictures that she's made in Europe, in Venice, in shipyards, airports, abandoned factories. We're going to talk about her technique, which involves a pinhole camera, or camera obscura. And I think everything else will be part of the discussion. I did want to say that she has shown in so many places, I think 30 solo exhibitions, including the 2015 retrospective, which was at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston and New Orleans Museum of Art. And right now, if you happen to be going to London, she has a show, Turning Time, that's on view at the Gagosian Gallery through April 14th. She's in collections around the world, Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum, SF MoMA, Dia Art Foundation, and also in Zurich and Berlin, and LACMA, just to name a few. And she's been the recipient of many fellowships and awards, including the DAAD grants, the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, Pollock Krasner Foundation, and many other books and catalogs have been made about her work. So we're so happy to have with us here tonight artist Vera Lutter. Vera, it's so great to have you here. And she just came from, you were probably just in the studio today. We have a dark room at LACMA in one of our galleries. That's part of the fun part of this project we're going to talk about. But Vera, I'm so happy to have you here tonight, and I want to talk about your work here at LACMA, but we're going to go through some other work too, if you'll allow us. And I want to start with a work of art that you made here. Now, we are not going to show all of the works she has made here at LACMA, in part because we have an exhibition planned for the future, but we're going to give you a glimpse of some of the amazing work that's already been made. So I wanted, if we could, just to start with a work of art that you made here at LACMA as part of this residency. And if I may, I can just say that part of the idea that we developed, and I'd like us, we'll talk a little about this, is Vera and I have known each other for a long time, which will come out in the conversation. But part of the thought was to make pictures of LACMA and parts of LACMA that may not be here anymore. That was one of the ideas. This picture, I don't know if you can see it, everyone can see it, but is of the Rodin Garden, right? Which was one of the sites that you selected to look at parts of LACMA that would be in the future changed. And part of that idea was that it was really important to honor these beautiful, this place that so many people have been through parts of their lives, have seen art in, have been with families and friends. And so the LACMA that would disappear needed to be preserved in a way, and what could be a better means of doing that to commission a great artist to make work around it. So maybe, Vera, we could just start by talking a little bit about this picture and your selecting this site and why you made this one, which is, by the way, one of the most beautiful pictures that I've seen in a while. And maybe just talk about also how you thought about making this particular composition.
Thank you, Michael. And before I start talking about my pictures, I want to thank everyone here at LACMA and in Los Angeles, but first of all at LACMA, and thank you, Michael, for inviting me to come here and work with this great museum and with Jenny King, the curator of the project. Everybody's working incredibly hard. As my mind meeting Michael's mind means we're taking on a lot of big ideas. So one of the big ideas is this picture, which is, as Michael said, of the Rodin Sculpture Garden. When Michael and I first started talking about this project, and when Michael had invited me to come here and think about this opportunity to portray a museum and its art that will change, I, of course, walked around a lot and thought about its different aspects, and I just thought it was beautiful and a little bit enchanting to look down the stairs, look down at the art that's underneath the palm trees, and yet see on the side the architecture of one of the museums, of the buildings, one of such building that we are in right now, and bring it all together. It's wonderful when you stand there on top of the stairs, you see you're sort of in the middle, at mid-height of the palm trees, and you feel how the leaves of the palm trees move, and you're somewhat standing in the wind and in the movement and in the city and in the museum at once. So that was part of the idea, what I tried to capture with this image. It's a large image. It's about 120 inches wide, I think, and 90 inches tall. I'm not so good with feet because I measure everything with inches. And it's been about a 6-hour exposure, which in my world is short. And due to the length of the exposure, we capture movement like the wind and the trees and things like that.
We're going to talk a little about the process later, because I think we have some illustrations of some of the equipment you use and other things. And I thought, but it would be interesting to just start with images. If you can feel, I don't know if you can see in the audience, but there is this sense of the wind, as there's a blurriness to the foliage that doesn't exist. The blurriness doesn't exist in the architecture, which is so perfectly sharp. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about this picture, is that sort of subtle movement in the foliage. And I don't know, Vera, if it's, I did think about this idea that when I first encountered your pictures, there was an aspect of memory or even dream, that the idea that everything is reversed, black and white, white for black, that all of a sudden you've turned the world into an abstraction of black and white, but then its reversal is a further abstraction that seems to me some kind of other emotion or feeling we get when we're inside these big pictures. I don't know if that's a fair thing to talk about, memory or dream in relation to this.
Well, of course it is, because, if it were just a pure replica of reality, I think it would be boring, right? And so I think what I'm interested in and what I'm challenged by is trying to find a place that maybe we all know, or many of us know, and that is a fairly familiar urban place. Keep it recognizable, but turn it into, put it at the edge of something new that makes us interested in exploring what it really is that we're looking at, and seeing clearly.
I was thinking about when, and we've never really actually talked about this, but when I originally asked you if you would be interested in doing this after we had talked about doing something for many years, I had this idea that often we remember things through pictures if we have them. Right? We often will remember our past through a snapshot because the snapshot is there, or a picture we have of somebody that remains, and that sometimes it's harder to conjure the actual memories if we have a picture in between. And somehow it was my thought that, of course, there are many pictures of LACMA. people will remember some of these buildings, the Robert Irwin Palm Garden, this particular arrangement of Rodin's. By the way, the Rodin's have been rearranged several times, but this is the one that exists now. And that somehow the picture is, it's a kind of ever-present memory. It's that pictures work that way. And I don't know if you ever think about that in terms of the way these images function for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of, I find images in dreams. What I then make of them is very different. And, you know, some that I've found I have yet to make because reality has never matched them. But I've always thought that I'm, in a way, mapping the world for myself. Especially when I started doing this, when I moved to New York and I was so excited about the city and I wanted to really make it my own and conquer it. I did so by making images of it.
And it does seem true when we talk about your projects. Most people, I think, would think of a photographer would see something, because you're not a photographer in a traditional sense, and then you make a picture of it. But in working with you, it seems like you almost have a dream-like image in your mind, and then you just have to find the thing that fits that, whether it's a... I remember our first conversations about helping you get into airports, that you had a dream-like image, and then you had to find the place that met the dream rather than you saw something and said, oh, that would be great to make an image of. Is that also a fair reversal?
Absolutely right, yes. I know exactly what I want to do, and then I have to find the place in the world where I can do it.
Right, because I even this project came out of, it says, oh, it's great. Somebody actually said how great it is that we brought you here. And I said, I think you brought you here partly because we had been talking, and then how this came about in part was that you had begun working, you had in your mind's eye an image of museums, right? You had done a few little experiments where you had gotten your smaller camera into museums and were taking images of works of art. So I feel like you conjured us as a site as well, potentially, maybe.
Sounds right. That's right.
So let's go to another.
Michael said, if ever you have an idea, call me. I'd like to work with you again. So I had an idea, and I called him.
So and
he said, let's do more. So
a highly unusual thing for me to say. So this project started a little bit. Your interest also was in making images of other art, and I know it changed a lot, because originally it was exhibitions, and there are problems with exhibitions because they're only up for a certain amount of time. The camera is large. You know, it's hard to interrupt them if they're only up for 3 months. But we talked about the fact that we had collections, and the collections were under our control. And you had said you had actually been interested in photographing collections or making images of collections, and people were a little unsure about letting you take a very expensive painting to your studio to make an image. And so in this case, we brought you to the museum, and you actually have, well, she sort of lives in the museum, or you did for a while. But I wanted to show one of these, which was among your first of the very large images of pictures in the collection. And this is definitely one of these don't try this at home projects. We'll show you the camera, the box that makes these images, but even the idea of working inside a museum and working with masterpieces of art is kind of complicated, and we had to work this out through months of discussion and figuring out how logistically to do this so that you could take a big European painting in this case and make an image that had an exposure time, you thought, even then, I mean, I forget, is this 35 days plus or minus?
Very good, 36.
36 days, okay. That was close. And I don't know if you can all in the audience feel this picture. Now, the actual image is about 5 feet high, right?
Taller, I think.
Taller, 6 feet high, yeah.
7. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe even. So it's a big picture, and I remember we had to work with curators, and we'll show some of that. Patrice Marindel was the curator of European painting and sculpture at the time, and so there was a lot of discussions with him about even moving these pictures and what you wanted to do. We'll talk more about that, but one of the things he said about this picture that was so powerful is that the subject is a martyrdom. You can see can you see the knife? It's a Lucretia. And what he said about this picture, and I think he even said it in the video that Sotheby's made, who sponsored this, that somehow you turned a martyrdom into an ascension. If you're thinking about typologies of painting, that there was a complete transformation of one subject to another, because in your images, the subject isn't immediately recognizable sometimes. And I thought it was such a beautiful thing that he said about the idea that this is and is not a document of the original painting. In fact, it's so different in so many ways. And even, you know, these dark spots, which are actually light spots, they're reflections off the painting in light, creates a complete transformation. Now, I know you had never made a picture like this. Did you have this in mind? Did you have an idea of what you would get through this process?
I'm not so sure. I knew exactly, as you know, that this would be my first picture to photograph in this
Which you
idea.
selected.
Yeah, I selected, yeah. I mean, really, I selected them all, right? And that's very intuitive. It's an entirely intuitive selection. I wanted to be, you know, I didn't want to turn to the greatest masterpieces of art history, because I thought that would be just so heavy-handed. And so this was a very intuitive choice. And I think what Michael mentioned, what Patrice recognized, is really what, I mean, it's all there. And the idea in photographing these beautiful paintings and bringing them into a black and white and negative form is, I mean, at best, and I think it succeeded in this case, to bring out the essence of what's already there. I mean, of course, the painter painted this. The painter painted an ascension that looks like a martyrdom when you look at it, but when you sort of reverse it and you look at its skeleton, that's what it is. And so, of course, that makes me very happy that that succeeded in this very first one, because it gives meaning to what we're doing. It's obviously not just a copy.
And so but this was in your mind's eye for a while. You had made those other smaller experiments, right? You'd been in the National Gallery, the Degas that I had seen, and some of the others, but you had never actually had a chance to make a big picture of another picture.
No, it started with my wanting to photograph sculptures, and I had a friend at the Metropolitan Museum at the time, and he enabled me to photograph within the Greek and Roman collection. I was interested in the fragmented body and portraying it with a smaller form of camera that I have. And I'd done it there, and the National Gallery of Art followed, inviting me to Washington with the smaller scale work. And very independently of that, MoMA also asked me to participate in a project about the sculpture garden. But this was always about sculpture. I had always photographed three-dimensional objects, and I've never before coming to LACMA photographed painting. And I was a little concerned about it, just because I really love painting. I really have enormous respect for all painters, and was concerned that this could go wrong.
Well, obviously it didn't go wrong. I remember seeing this when it first emerged, because of course you didn't really know what to expect in this transformation. And I did know that. I mean, sculpture, you started with ceramics and pottery, and your work is always, I've always thought of your work as sculptural. In fact, the camera is a piece of sculpture. We often talk about architecture in space. So, I mean, it is really a landmark picture for you to have made this first. I mean, I guess the only other work you photographed that was two-dimensional was your own.
That's right, yeah.
Which
was
of a three-dimensional experience as well.
Yes, and within sort of a spacious installation to create space.
Yeah.
Here I'm not creating space.
I mean, I do remark that these paintings for me have become more sculptural in your eye and work, because somehow the black and white abstraction, the dark chiaroscuro, the light and shade brings out figures that have a strange kinship to some of your other images of objects and things. I don't know if that's fair to think, but they do lose some of their flatness. Now, that's not true of every one, but certainly this one could, if you didn't know immediately and if you had blocked out the frame, I'm not sure it would be clear it was a painting. Maybe.
That's a nice point, yes. Yes, I mean, and that would be another success of this transformation.
So to go back to sculpture and architecture, the project really had three parts as we resolved it, which was one, to look at the exterior of the museum. Two was to create these, we joke about them as copy stand images, although this is no copy stand you would have at home. We'll show pictures later. And then third was the notion of the museum interior. And I'm just going to show one, because there are others that you will see in the exhibition, but one amazing picture that surprised me and even all of us that you made that definitely has a sculptural quality. These are objects that are in our Oceanic Tribal Arts collection, a collection that I was so proud to help bring to LACMA, and you seized upon it immediately and then started rearranging it. As artists or curators will do. But then the rearrangement, because it's this artifice, is that I think you started, well, what's in the museum, but we kept giving more and more permission to Vera to pick the picture she wanted and then to even rearrange the gallery. So maybe you could say something about how this picture came to be in your mind.
Well, again, I just love this work, and I was delighted to find this collection here at LACMA when I first visited. And yeah, very, very generously, curator Nancy Thomas allowed me to basically use her collection. It was like being a kid in a candy store. I was allowed to pick all my favorite pieces, and then with the help of my great assistants, that most of them are in the room here, for days and days and days, we would arrange them in front of my camera. I usually sit inside the camera and I say, well, that southeast corner, a quarter inch to the left. Never mind, I see everything upside down, reversed, and the person outside. So anyway, in a very long and extended process, we came up with this arrangement, and that's made by myself sitting in the camera and looking at the projected image with a much wider open lens until it was exactly what I wanted. And you know, for some more art historically informed people than myself, it might be barbaric, because I've brought all these characters together that aren't from the same tribe and aren't from the same island and might not really speak the same language, but I wanted them all to talk to one another. And I think we succeeded in doing so. This is a 3-month exposure. So for 3 months, I had full access to the collection and to this part of the gallery space. And it was meticulously maintained every day. Lighting was checked, and you know, the conditions were checked so that this image could come together.
And there are some others of the interior of the museum that you're working on, some that are as long as 6 months. But it's funny, Nancy Thomas, I think, is here, and we were talking about the fact that this makes no art historical or geographic sense on one level, but it's also true that these objects were also not really meant for museums, that they were meant to be animated, they were meant to be part of performance, they were meant to be sort of living things. And I think that one of the aspects that exists in this picture is this kind of living, abstracted energy. They have more energy, I think, sometimes as images than they even do in the gallery, as beautiful as those things are. So you've given them, I would say, something else that is very important to them, which is that energy. They do seem to populate the space and yet seem ghostly also, to somehow recognize that there is, I don't know, for me, something that's also absent or reversed about these objects even being in the museum. There's a problematic. They were really meant for life and performance and ritual, and yet we have preserved them in a static form in the museum. And somehow I do feel like that even comes out in these, the critique comes out in these pictures a little bit. Anyway, you're going to love the other ones too when they're finally cooked.
And we should probably add to it that also with what I'm doing here, I can change scale. Yeah. So some objects appear to be much bigger than they really are in real life, but you know, they come to life, as Michael said, displaying their full spirit and their power.
Yeah, I think they have a lot of that in this picture. It's very intense. I want to go backwards now to your discovery of this approach. I mean, it uses photographic techniques. It's a lot like painting. You said you're involved in sculpture. I know architecture is very much part of it because you literally build spaces to make pictures. So this is Vera's first camera.
My bedroom.
Her bedroom. And I actually learned about you, I think the year after you made your first picture. There was a collector in New York City, and I was having a discussion, and he had a very interesting taste. He was one of those collectors who would buy at auction, but he would also go to flea markets. And he had a very, very broad view of what was possible in this medium of photography in particular, which is he considered himself a collector of photography, really insightful guy. And he told me about this artist who was living in a squatter's apartment, he described it, and had turned her apartment into a camera. And I thought, oh my God, I have to see that. And I did.
He never came.
I never saw the apartment, but I saw the picture, and this was one of the first pictures. You were in Manhattan. So can you tell us a little about this kind of revelation, or it is a bit of an epiphany to, you'd never worked like this. You were in New York, you were a ceramicist, you were trained in a different way, and you'd never even picked up a camera to make art, right?
Hardly, yeah. No, I never really had, but I came to New York in '93, and I had been first a ceramicist, as Michael said, and then a sculptor, and I knew sort of there was change in the air, and therefore it was also great to come to New York and put some distance between where I came from and, you know, identifying that with what I was working with and on. And so there was this idea to bring my new life. I lived in that room. It was a terrific space because I was on the 27th floor of this high-rise in the Garment District, and at the time the Garment District just consisted of all these, you know, we would say mid-size high-rises today. There wasn't much tall build-up, and I had a fabulous view over the whole neighborhood and towards the Empire State Building. For me, it was fabulous, and the view south was the World Trade Center. So anyway, I was in a bird's nest there, and I wanted to bring all these impressions of my new life that I experienced there in this raw space into a form of art, and that's where the idea came up to turn the space into a camera obscura, into a pinhole camera, and capture all these sensations. I mean, I was thinking also of sound and vibration and all these things into the space, and make the window, you see these black traces that you see there are where I had taped up my pinholes, make the window the eye looking into the world, and replace myself with a sensitive photographic emulsion, so replace my own experience with an art material. I'd never taken a picture before. I'm not a trained photographer. No trained photographer would ever get herself into what I'm doing. It's way too hard and way too complicated. It's really, really hard work. I love it, but when you know it, you would probably not approach that. So anyway, the windows were dark, and I put photographic paper on the back wall, and pay attention to that radiator pipe there, because when Michael forwards now, you see the pipe. I put the photographic paper behind the pipe on the wall, and the shadow of the pipe created a photogram, whereas the rest is a photograph that was, you know, articulated by the pinhole on the window surface. It was made in the winter. The white spaces there on the roofs is snow. And you can tell I hadn't yet really figured it out so well, getting gray tones. The buildings are still very silhouetted. But I was able to make my first photograph, which is, excuse me, about 8 feet wide and maybe around 8 feet tall.
It wasn't your first try, though, this photograph.
No, I came in with more sculptural ideas. I wanted to bring it onto a canvas. So I painted this canvas with something that was called liquid light, photographic emulsion. And I was cooking that up at night in this tiny little loft space, and then painting it onto canvas to expose it the next day. And I couldn't really get that to work. It just never really evenly distributed itself on the canvas, and then in processing it, it didn't really relate an image. And after 6 weeks of trying, I said, the hell with this, I at least want to see, I want one result. And I then brought in photographic paper, and that's when the lights came on, and I was really, really astounded about the result.
It wasn't long after this picture, and it was interesting because I had heard that story about your work and was interested in seeing it, and then the curator at DIA, Lynn Cook, had come to your work through some completely other route. I don't even remember, and she had you on this list of young artists that she wanted to show at DIA Art Foundation, where we had our space on 22nd Street. And so immediately we had this conversation. I was like, oh yes, I know all about that work, which she was shocked about. And of course, the show was decided that moment that if you were willing, we would ask you to do an exhibition. And then, of course, I made the project bigger, as usual. So we exhibited some of your earliest pictures that are now iconic. I mean, this is in the Metropolitan Museum's collection, I think, now. This was in the DIA show. It's of a sign that no longer exists, which was famous on the other side of the East River, the Pepsi-Cola sign. And it's a masterpiece as a picture. I mean, the white, black, the structure of the sign. You had put your camera on the rooftop, right, to make this picture, yeah. Which must have been one of your first Herculean efforts to find a site that really shouldn't be a site for an image.
That's right, yeah, it was Herculean. The idea was born by seeing that sign. I mean, we spoke about images coming about from dreams or memory. This one was really inspired because I saw this in the world. I saw it at night. I was driving with friends on the FDR, that highway on Manhattan that looks over to Queens. And I thought, I have to find this. So I had a bicycle at the time, and I bicycled over to Queens the next day and found the Pepsi-Cola bottling factory, which was in the process of retiring. And of course, you know, knocked on the door and said, could I just see your rooftop? And they said, no. And so I asked for another 4 weeks, and the answer was no. And by then, I had befriended the chief curator of photography at the Metropolitan Museum and said, would you write me a letter? She kindly wrote me a letter, and then my phone call was answered. And I was brought up through this really, really spooky, empty, decaying factory onto the roof. And then there was a shocking reality that on the roof was no cabin, no house, no nothing, from which I could turn into a camera. But I had worked so hard and made it thus far that I said, you know, we have to build a house. And I had a few friends, all of them artists, of course, and that was Herculean. Yeah, we brought all the lumber for a little house up manually for factory floors because the electricity in that building had already been shut off. And we built this cabin on top of an old air conditioning shaft. And then I had the opportunity to photograph there for the summer of 1997. And the idea, of course, my idea was that I photographed through this pop cultural icon, this logo of commerce, which has this architectural translucency, if you wish, and this theatrical setting on the scaffold on top of the factory's roof, looking through it towards this metropolis of New York, which is this international city, you know, that brings to birth so many different things. And I wanted to mend those two sensations, those two aspects together. And what happened next is, of course, I didn't speculate on that, but that's what happens. The logo is, of course, designed to be read from Manhattan. So when you stand on the roof, you read it backwards. But my camera turns things upside down and backwards. So then it was forwards again. And that's just sort of very fun side effect.
Well,
here.
and also this picture, like some of your pictures, even the Lucretia, it's not clear immediately it is a negative because you've so transformed the image and constructed it. It's not clear this is a negative at all. First of all, you're reading Pepsi-Cola correctly, and the black could be black and the white could be white, and there's a quality, I mean, maybe not of the city pictures where the buildings look so bright, but it's amazing how some of the pictures are not clearly to the eye even a negative at first, and I think that's even true of some of the transformations you made of the LACMA pictures. So this is the first chance now you had your friends build the camera, you got a museum involved because we had this idea that once I saw this picture of this, you know, the air conditioning units and the little huts and the scaffolding of all that stuff looked so amazing. So I had just found the factory that became Dia Beacon, the museum that some of you may know, and it was kind of a wreck. I knew it was going to be amazingly beautiful, but we talked about this idea, wouldn't it be amazing if you could make pictures of the factory before it became a museum? And so now I think you can kind of see that the project we're doing now is a little bit of a bookend or a reversal of this, of the museum before it becomes, disappears. This is the factory before it disappears, or the birth of this building of the museum. So this is one of the big pictures you made in the vast spaces at the Nabisco factory at Dia. And it's funny because these quite ugly and imposing air handling pipes, because this building was built before air handling. You just opened the windows in the 20s, and so they had filled this building with all this junk. You could see through it to the great bones, but I just love the way these ugly air conditioning ducts became like rays of light that seemed to infuse the building with a sort of spiritual quality, and even the leftover chairs that were sitting there are some kind of witness to a performance that is about to happen, or in this emptiness. It again, completely transformational, and I don't think anyone would even immediately recognize the building in it early on. But we did build you a camera. That was the first camera I got to build you.
Yes, the first.
And it was, I want to say, air-conditioned.
That's true,
because
yeah.
it was in the summer and it was deadly hot, and so we tried to figure out how it would be humane for you to be in there, and Jim Scheufele nicely put in. That was your first air-conditioned camera, right?
No, it's not about me.
It's about the picture.
It's about the photo paper. Because if that gets so humid, it starts, and you know, this is a 5 or 6 day exposure. The paper gets so wavy that you can't make a clear image. Nobody had given me an air conditioner. I mean, Michael would have, of course, but it's always about the art.
It was comfy in there.
Yeah, it was nice.
It was not so bad in the heat of the summer. But maybe here's one other picture. I love this one, of course, because you've stopped the clock, but the clock was stopped because, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, a hurricane hit during the 4-day exposure. Halfway, so you see, I made 2 exposures in this location, and the first one, well, this is the first one. The clock was still spinning. The second one has a still clock face. And here, you know, I snuck in a little bit secretly. Michael and the people and curator Lynn Cook and had made maquettes of Walter de Maria's, what's the piece
Equal
called?
Area series. We had made them in cardboard.
Yeah, but painted silver on top very beautifully, and laid them out to, I suppose, see how it behaves in space. And so here I come, and I got to photograph the art in space. Yeah, that was the first of 2, looking from one building into the next.
Oh, I think, do we have the second one? I don't think we do.
We don't have the second one with the stop clock.
But by the way, this is the pleasure. Once you start to learn how to read Vera's work, you looked for the clock, the stopped, what's moving, what's not, the leaves, the architecture, the artifacts. I mean, obviously that couldn't be an artwork in that situation, but of course, because they're cardboard, you can't, and in this picture, you can't distinguish it from real art because of the situation.
They were made to scale.
They were made to scale, I know. So that your picture brings all this together. Here was an amazing image of the basement, which is deep and dark, and you turned it into a temple of light. I mean, everyone remarks on the basement at DIA, but no one remarked on it more than I think as it was in your picture. It became this temple of light emerging from what is otherwise the deep darkness of the space, that transformation. And then maybe you could say a few words about how you, this was the first time I had seen you make a even more complex picture. It took me a while to even understand what was happening. I saw this in your studio and then kind of understand you must have been taking pictures of pictures. And I wondered if you could describe this image in relation to this one and how you came to this incredibly complicated and beautiful picture.
Well, you know, it doesn't take so much to arrive at the idea I mean, for me, it was always interesting to work with my own work, and I needed to build up a vocabulary of images that I then wanted to use to, so to speak, create fictional spaces and play with the question, what is a space and what is an image of space and where's the image and where's the reflection. So the DIA photographs that I made in the basement of Nabisco were ideal for me because with these wide open spaces and the minimalist columns, they were somewhat neutral. And I took 2 of those images and installed them in my studio at the time in New York. And then one of them was flanked with a mirror. You see, it looks almost like a Rorschach there, where that wide column doubles up. The part to the right is photographed. The part to the left is a mirror where you see the line on the ground. What spaciously really was installed in my studio looked so enormously different from what in the end I photographed. But the idea was, as I said, I wanted to experiment and examine the idea of space and the idea of imagery of space.
And this is as complicated a sculptural architectural construction. It takes a long time to even figure out what it is, and but yet it has an essential accessibility, like taking you into a zone or a world you don't know where you're going. It's an incredibly complex and beautiful picture. And just to give you, I picked 2 other pictures from your more recent work that I think are things that I have always loved, one of which we acquired. But this picture, the Zeppelin, is one of the most astounding images made in recent time, because this was the beginning of the airport conversation, right? Of getting your access to airports. And I happen to know the head of Lufthansa PR at that time. And then finally, what emerged were these pictures that were taken in Friedrichshafen, right?
That's right.
Of these Zeppelins, and now you know how to read Vera's pictures. You can see, why is there a ghost? Why can you see through the Zeppelin? Because these exposures are so long, and obviously the Zeppelin was in and it was out. So unlike that DIA exposure, which was, I think, 8 months actually.
No,
this one
DIA was
less.
3.
The basement?
The basement, 3 or 4, something in that area, but long enough.
But once you see that, you can see how to read these pictures, and I guess you knew that was going to happen, or?
I didn't.
You didn't?
I didn't. I had a little residency in this southern town of Friedrichshafen where this company that originally had built the Zeppelin took it upon itself to try and rebuild it. And so I went there for a whole summer to try and photograph it, renting a shipping container, placing it in the hangar. And this was made in 1997, so that is basically 3 years into my experiments. And one morning I woke up, and I got up and I looked out on Lake Constance, And I thought, this is not funny. The Zeppelin, which I was photographing, was flying in the air. So, all right.
Wasn't supposed to do that.
No, absolutely not. You know, my camera was running day 3, and they had just opened. And you know, you try always to communicate with these people, but they never do what they tell you they do.
Museum included.
Yep. Good luck. So anyway, hangar doors open, light floods in, the Zeppelin gets pulled out in test flight. But I got lucky. You know, I have the ghost that presents itself with its materiality and yet also with its ability to fly and therefore translucency.
Which is, I mean, this picture is so many things, including the ghost of the Zeppelin, the history of those, the everything about that, the light. And this picture, like, so we have pictured some empty places, the top rooftop of Pepsi Cola, the Beacon Nabisco factory, but a lot of places you take images of, and I assume this is one included, is a hubbub of activity of people, and the camera has absorbed their presences, but they're not there, right? So I don't know if this is one of those where there were many people, but even one picture you're making in LACMA's galleries, there are a lot of people in there, but of course they will not, unless they stand still for a couple of months, which anybody's welcome to try, they're not there, right? So they've absorbed the energy without the images.
Very right. So many ghosts in my images. Of course, all these places, not all, Pepsi wasn't populated, but here many workers walk through the hangar all day long and night shift too. But anything that moves slowly but not slowly enough will not inscribe itself with my long exposures. Right. So effectively, all these people, they walk through the light rays and are in the images, but we can't see them. And I'm very, very excited about that idea related to the galleries. Yeah.
And that goes back to your original idea of your apartment where you were pulling all those people, the energy. It's literally light energy of all that presence. It seems sort of cosmological in some sense that I can't quite describe, but it feels that way. I mean, this is one picture, and we were lucky enough to acquire this as part of last year's collectors committee, which is the temple in Pestum. These are all, again, very big 3-section images. This is also 8 feet high or something, and quite wide. Mm-hmm. And you've turned this ancient temple into like a futuristic temple of light again. It has a nice resonance with the Dia image of columns.
Yeah, the fascination, of course, being that old antique architecture and the question, you know, what did the people of that time really, what did they look for? What did they feel? What was their true, you know, spiritual purpose of building this? It's fantastic architecture. We know all of that. They were building masters. We know that. They did incredible, you know, craft and work. But if you wonder why and what, you know, what kind of feelings and what kind of importance in their lives that this building really have that survived for 2,000 years plus and stands there as the Sprout Relic to people that really no longer know what it actually is.
I saw this in your studio the first day we had a meeting in New York about the potential LACMA project. I think we hadn't sorted it out, and I, of course, thought, oh my God, what could be a better image to put even in our ancient galleries? Because there is always that problem. You have these artifacts or smaller pieces of cultures that are in the museum in Los Angeles, and you lack the architectural frame, the context. But of course, you don't want to fake a piece of a building or something like that. And in this picture, it seemed like it really has that questioning of the ghosts, of the spirits of that time. And I couldn't imagine a better image to juxtapose with some of our ancient classical objects, or to show, and that was, I said it went with everything. You could put it in the photography gallery, you put it in the painting gallery, you could put it in the ancient galleries. And we're really excited to have it in the collection. So I know we have to move along here, but I just did want to show some of the pictures of the process. People often, when they talk about Vera's work, get into the process quickly. So I wanted to reverse the conversation a little bit, because the process is so extraordinary and, as Vera says, so time-consuming, so difficult. If anybody, including you, knew what you were getting into, you would probably say no. And just as one measure, here's the crane on the left lifting a camera up on the balcony there. And by the way, we're trying something new. On the right, we have, it was so fascinating to us that there were a lot of images taken of the work. And so we're going to, while we're talking, we're going to show you some of the B-roll we have of the work going on, little experiment and conversations here. But I think you can get from this picture just one aspect of the difficulty, which is Vera usually wants her put her, it's not like a point and shoot camera, and often she wants to put it in very odd locations, as you've heard. And this was one I think you imagined right away. You wanted this view from above.
Yeah, it's a really astounding place here at LACMA, on the bridge. Yeah. You really wonder if you're in some spaceship or in some kind of different place. Yeah. Very complicated.
And of course, this camera was built outside. You see it being built there. There's the camera up on the bridge, and it stayed there for a while as images were being made. We're actually, I know it's not fair, but we're not going to show you the picture it took, because we're saving some things for the exhibition so that you don't feel like you've seen it all. There are quite a few pictures. We will show a couple more. Here's more of the labor of, there you get the scale of the camera, because of course it's a camera you can sit in. I've sat in it, as have your assistants.
So when I really need to talk to Michael, I ask him to come inside my camera. It's dark. You can lock the door. There's one blanket in it on which he is allowed to sit. You know, it's like no chairs. And then you can have a focused conversation.
Right. About the next crazy thing she wants to do. But there you are looking through the pinhole. This is the larger hole, right? So that you can get a test image often, right? The pinhole.
Well, the test image is a new idea that I, for whatever reason, came to me 20 years into what I'm doing here at LACMA, but, you know,
still learning.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can use a wider aperture in very dark spaces. You can have a bigger hole, not a real pinhole, and then you get an image that's like an instant image, a few days of something that might take months, right?
That's right. I mean, here, and that's nothing new. If you wish, I just work with the much larger hole that projects a much brighter image, which in return is, of course, less focused, but allows me to more quickly determine what I'm seeing and what I'm doing.
We just saw the camera where it was placed to take that picture of the Rodin garden. And then, of course, this artist needed a darkroom on the premises. So we converted one of our galleries into a darkroom. We had lots of discussions about the chemicals and what we had to do to wash the pictures and do this. But hey, when you have an artist in residence, she might as well be in residence. So this is the actual darkroom. There's some developing of paper. I think that's just a test strip, right?
You can't really tell. It doesn't look like a
Could
masterpiece.
be, yeah. You never know what you're going to get exactly, but you actually do. There you are with Jenny King. That picture could have been taken any one of about 1,000 days discussing the next problem. And this is your studio at LACMA. So we had the dark room, which is behind there, and then a drying room, which is behind there on the right, and then your office and studio, which was a lot of fun to have. Of course, this makes it easy when you want to present the artist to your potential patrons or curators or friends. You just knock on the door. You don't actually have to go. Makes the studio visit very easy. There you are with Patrice, having one of many discussions. And he really got into the project. I'm hoping he's going to write something about it. Here is, this is the, so here we are in the copy room. We built 2 rooms for you to put up pictures, as you see on the right. And then there's another room behind this wall where there's photographic paper, and then there's a tiny little pinhole there. And so you're actually, in this case, making an image here. And depending on the distance on the aperture, you can make an image that's bigger or smaller. You can zoom in, if you will, right, on the
That's right.
On the painting?
That's right.
And you knew that, of course. You talked to me originally of like resizing or taking our little Jackson Pollock and making it a big one, or not, or some other pictures.
That's right.
And has that worked as you thought it would?
Not really. Not really. It seems often naturally I've stuck with the size, I mean, more or less, give 2 inches or not, with the size of the original artwork. And in a few cases, I've tried to make it bigger, and I can't really say why, but it's never really turned out phenomenally. And I think that the answer is pretty simple. Of course, I choose good artwork that I photograph, and that means that the original artist made very good decisions in terms of scale.
Although I have to say, this is an image that you made in 2 sizes. This is, I know you picked the image. I was hoping you would pick this image, the Sanra Dam, one of my favorite pictures in the whole collection. And you made it slightly bigger, which was kind of amazingly transformative to me, because the miniature is beautiful, but when you're looking at that picture, your head goes right into it, and you get very close to see it. But when you enlarged it just slightly, the architecture emerged in a new way. I don't know if you were as happy with that one, but I'm super happy with it. And it's going to be part of the collection thanks to a wonderful painting.
When I was speaking, I was thinking of 2 that didn't work. This is beautiful.
This is not this big. This, I think the original picture is like this big, and you made it.
It's about 4 feet by 3 feet, I think. I made it much bigger. But I also photographed School of El Greco and enlarged it, and it also worked beautifully. But I photographed a seascape, and that kind of just didn't work out. So it's not entirely clear.
One of the other things Vera gets to do in playing in the museum, like a playground, as many of you know, we're closed on Wednesday. So she has a portable camera.
Point and shoot.
Point and shoot. And between 5 p.m. on Tuesday to 11 a.m. on Thursday has been just enough time, like literally to the hour, right, to be able to make what we're calling the point and shoot pictures, but where you have this smaller box. And you have one that's bigger than this, right? This box?
No, my boxes are pretty much the same size. I've always been wanting to build a bigger one, but didn't get around to it yet. Yeah, so they're what? They're 30 inches by 20 inches by 15 inches. I came up with that early on when I started doing this work, and when it was so hard for me to find locations that would accommodate my request to photograph. And I had little opportunity to make work, so I started, I turned one of these boxes into a pinhole camera, and I've really kept them going ever since. And it's been a great pleasure to make these smaller works.
Yeah, so now we have a second collection of LACMA's images, but this was the original idea. This is what you had done in the mat, and this is what we started with, is that we would let you into the galleries. We hadn't at the beginning contemplated that we would actually move the pictures into the rooms on easels or on the wall. And you've made some incredible images. This is, again, small, so this is unfairly presented on the screen. This is about, whatever, 30 inches wide, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah. 30 by 15, I think. It's a small still life, which I kept pretty much to scale, I think, yeah.
We had a, oh. See what I'm saying?
Was there something funny?
Yes, they're like all pushing and pushing and pushing.
Okay.
This is not like grabbing a camera out of your pocket, just to say, again. But everybody was having fun doing it, moving it from one location to another. The last story, and I know we have to end soon, but we were asked to bring some pictures from LACMA to TAFAF to the old Master Fair in New York. The director or the leader of the fair asked me, would we bring some pictures because the Rijksmuseum, I think, had the year before, and it was a way to present the museum and promote the museum in New York City. And I was like, why would I bring our old master paintings to New York City? That's a little bit Coles to Newcastle, given the museum's there. And it wasn't a half second later that I realized we can bring Vera's pictures. So that's what we did. And so we did a little preview, and we made a booth at TAFAF at the Armory in New York. And we presented our collection through Vera's eyes.
Black and white and negative.
And it was a huge success. I think it was the most exciting fair at the booth, just because it was so unexpected, and people got a taste of the looking at LACMA. Oh, here they are pushing. So there was a lot of pushing of the camera, you can see, trying to.
The people who were pushing, I hear, they're probably having fun.
There is a Sisyphean quality to your projects. Okay, we're going to definitely have to have more of this when the show is on
pictures.
So finally, Vera, maybe tell me what you've learned a few things from being in the museum already. Are there things you've learned, things you're going to do in the future because of this? Other than the exhibition and the book. New dreams?
I've learned a lot about working with an institution. I've never done that before. I mean, how incredibly involved that is. I learn every day, every hour when I make my own work, but this has been an opportunity to work in a way that I probably never will again. I mean, I have 4 room-sized cameras going at LACMA, some of them one for 7 months. This is just a unique experience. And the outcome, however carefully I plan it and think about it, is always a surprise at the end. And every step is learning.
When I arrived at LACMA 12 years ago, I said that we were going to make LACMA a very artist-friendly place. I don't think the staff imagined that the artists would be putting the dark room in the museum, but I can speak for some of LACMA staff here, Vera, that we know we've been put to the test in terms of your precision and what you need as collaboration, but I think it's been worth every ounce of effort, and we cannot wait for the show and to see what more you're doing. And I just want to thank you for being here tonight and thank the audience.
Thank you.